Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sports Card Advantage podcast. This is episode 33. We are recording on Tuesday, November 9th, 2021 at 10:20 p.m. Way past Bunk's bedtime, but we're doing it anyway. How you doing, Bunk?
I'm good. I wish I had some coffee. How are you?
I am fantastic. We have a extremely special episode today. We have Ryan from Gemrate. Ryan is the founder of Gemrate on the podcast today. We actually already recorded the interview, and we will drop that here at the end. We're going to go through our Sports Card Advantage podcast business, talk about some investments, talk about a hot take for this week, and then play the interview. Awesome interview. Had a really great time talking to Ryan. Definitely take a deep dive down the rabbit hole on statistics. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have him on again. So with that being said, for those of you that are new to the podcast, we are on Instagram and Twitter, SportsCardADVTG. If you ever have any questions for the podcast or want to enter our weekly secret card giveaway, send us an email to info@sportscardadvantage.com. We are going to do this week's giveaway. I am going to pick the number myself, so I don't have to do this 10 times.
The people will not like this.
The uproar. Well, I'm tired of you picking 10 every week, so why don't you give me a number between 1 and 6?
6.
Because you're a dick. 6 rhymes with dick. That's what you are. All right, here we go. 6 coming at you. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Garrett is our winner. Congratulations, Garrett. I will email you to get your address, and we will get you your card in the mail. This week's choices, we have 2 new ones and a repeat. 2020 Mosaic Stairmasters Dak Prescott Gold out of 10. 2013 Keenan Allen Quad Relic Auto Rookie out of 449. And a 2020 Panini Black Van Jefferson Rookie Patch Auto out of 199. Van, definitely looking like he's having a bigger impact in the Rams offense. So that card could see a nice little bump in value. With that being said, any other Sports Card Advantage business that you'd like to cover for this week?
No, I think we're good. Let's have at it.
Yes, let us have at it. We're going to get through some of this stuff fairly quickly, just because the interview with Ryan is pretty lengthy. So try to keep the podcast to an hour every week. So this week's installment 5 in Bunk's offseason guide to buying baseball. Not exactly a whole lot of thought put into this one, but we'll talk about them anyway. Who do you got this week?
You want thought? I mean, you want high A 19-year-olds? Is that what you want me to send the people?
That definitely didn't sound good. High A 19-year-olds, but
well, baseball fans understand.
Well, why don't you give me who you have as your original pick, and then if you have a flyer for a high A 19-year-old, then you shoot that one out at the end.
Nah. We're talking about your boy Wander Franco,
the tall man himself.
Yeah, as tall as Jason Dominguez, sir.
And which card are we looking at so I can bring it up in Market Movers?
2019 Bowman Chrome.
2019 Bowman Chrome.
Okay. The one with him running, card number 100. I actually liked it in ladder better. The charts in ladder than movers for some reason.
Is it Chrome Prospects?
Yeah, Chrome Prospects.
Okay. And PSA 10?
PSA 10, yes sir.
All right, we got the chart up.
You got the 1 year chart up?
Yep, we got the 1 year chart up. So walk us through what you're looking at and why you like it.
Yeah, so high pop, but again, we're usually having me talking about the make money sooner than later department. So you can see on the chart there, the high sale was 377 and typical baseball fashion in that February, March, April window. And then you saw another spike on that chart in June with his call up, and then another spike on that chart with the Rays and his play at the end of the season there. And now I was looking at his prices, and they're starting to come back down to the previous low, which is $133. I believe the last sale might have been 177, maybe.
Hold on. Yeah, I think it's in the 170s. 170,
Yeah, it's in the
171.
170s. And as we head into November, December here, I'm looking to see if that thing's going to come back down to the previous low of 133. And even if it doesn't, I still like where it's sitting right now. That he's going to be coming into next season. We know he's breaking camp with the Rays. He's going to have a first full big league season under his belt. 2022 products are going to be absolutely loaded with Wander Franco. He'll be on the cover of every goddamn box, every pack. There's going to be 1,000 of them. So meanwhile, you guys can be scooping up Bowman Chrome prospect cards before that happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of support, pricing support at the 150 level. So if the card continues to fade a little bit in the off season, anything grabbing it around 150, there is some really good support from previous prices at that level.
And if you're concerned about the pop, keep an eye on it. So we know it's at just over 10K now. Look back again in a month, and did another 1,000 or 5,000 come back from PSA? Maybe. We'll take a look, and that'll certainly play a factor into some of our pricing. Raws right now can be had between 50 and 60 bucks, and as you'll hear about later from our friends at Gemrate, they're gemming at about a 74% clip, which is pretty nice.
It's always fun when you figure out statistical tools and then you're all excited about it, and they get thrown into everything that you're gonna provide for data now. Love it.
Yeah. Stats, guys.
Stats, all about it. Yeah, I think there's definitely potential for $100 here. This card hit 256 back in September. So I think that if you can pick it up in the 150 to 160 range, I think you could definitely see this card get back to that 250, 260 range. So there's, if you can make the 100 on it, I think that's a pretty solid jump.
For holding it for 3-4 months, I would say so.
Yeah, I mean, if you're making 65%, I mean that's basically what it would be.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk some basketball. For those of you that don't know or watch basketball, there is a 2020 rookie who has definitely emerged and playing well, Cole Anthony. If you look at his Prism stuff, his Prism stuff has already shot up. But his optic hollow has definitely lagged behind a bit. So even his Prism Silver raw stuff, you can still get fairly cheap, but it's already shot up a good amount. But if you look at his optic hollow raw, you can still pick these up for $30 a piece. I think it's a fantastic SGC play. So if you're picking up good condition raw that you feel you can do 9 5s and 10s on, he is definitely looking like he is going to have a great season, playing really good basketball. So an opportunity, if you buy in raw at $30 and can get it graded at SGC for 30, you're in for 60. There's not a lot of graded optic hollows, and as I said, Prism has already shot up, so hopefully you get the same level of movement out of this product as well.
Very Cool.
You can also look for the orange out of 199. Those are also going for relatively cheap, under $50, and they're colored, numbered parallels.
Yeah, I'm looking at not a whole heck of a lot of his stuff graded at all.
No, I mean it's from 2020 and it's not that expensive, so not a lot of people sending $40 cards, or even, I mean, shit, if you go back a few weeks on Cole Anthony, you could get some of his optic hollows raw for $10. I mean, you're not sending that to PSA.
No, you're not sending it to PSA, but for what it's worth, it has a 93% gem rate.
Well, there you go. Statistics guy. But I mean, how many total grades are there on
14
Cole Anthony? Is that total?
Of silver prism, yes. 13 out of 14 got a 10.
So yeah, there's definitely not a ton of stuff graded. Take a quick look. He has 268 total 10s across all products, and 506 total pieces have been submitted to PSA. So definitely not a ton of stuff.
Nah, so you could be the first one in, guy.
Yeah, well, we've learned from previous experience, it's not always the best to be the first one selling things with no comps. But
this is true.
Anyway, all right, moving right along. We are gonna jump into this week's hot take.
You love this week's hot take.
I love this week's hot take. I have, so we talk a ton about grading on this podcast, and we talk a ton about values of SGC, PSA, etc. So some of the stuff that we've been doing from our own personal buy, flip, make money is to try and find SGC 10s that have a good deviation between their cost and PSA 10, so that we can basically crack them and resubmit them. So we've looked at a ton of SGC 10 cards over the last few weeks, and one of the things that we're noticing is SGC 10, there's one of two problems that are going on. Either A, they're not that stringent on the grading and they're giving away 10s, or B, there's some sort of defect with the case that is causing the card to bounce around, and it's causing surface damage, and it's causing corner damage. I mean, there are literally, I can pull up 10 examples of things that I saved the links on where corners are mangled. And I'm not talking about there's a little bit of white. I mean, this is like gray to the point where the card is like the corner's been bent.
Yeah, naked eye in an eBay picture,
yeah,
and you can see it on a 10.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
I mean, literally, as Bunk said, naked to the naked eye. There was one that we were looking at, a high-end soccer card, and I've noticed this a bunch with soccer, is that with the 2020 Chrome soccer product, that for some reason on the back that there is surface damage. So there was a card that we were bidding on eBay where I literally emailed the seller and I said, is that glare or is that paint chipped off? Like, or, the ink. And he basically said it's from the case. He responded in the email that it's from the case. The card was an SGC 10. I mean, but there was literally to the point where you couldn't see lettering. Like,
the seller was blaming the case.
Yeah, the seller was blaming the case. And I don't know if the card is somehow, like, if it's getting bounced around and the card's hitting the plastic and sticking, and then as it like drops, it's peeling some of the ink off the card. But I mean, the card is an SGC 10. It was a Topps Chrome. It was a Topps Chrome card that the PSA 10 version of was selling for like $4,000, and the SGC version was selling for like $1,500 to $2,000. And I normally would have bought, cracked, and resubmitted, but as soon as he said that in fact it was the ink removed, and we didn't bid on it because there's no way that we'd have gotten anywhere near a PSA 10. And to me, that scares the crap out of me that if I buy a card, that it may not be protected in the case. But it's something that we think that you should all be aware of when you're looking at SGC for either grading or buying 10s and resubmitting to PSA. Don't just assume that it's an easy 10 because SGC gave it a 10. You have to look at that like it's raw.
Yeah, I mean, I just, if you saw me, I just stood up for a second because I had a couple of SGCs above me here, and the card's not moving in the case. I find it hard to believe the case is causing corner damage. I mean, they have the nice cutouts on each of the corners here. You can shake the case. There's no movement whatsoever. I mean,
well, do you still have those?
These are older cards, so maybe modern day SGCs, since they're pumping them out more than they used to, maybe there's a lack there. But there's nothing wrong with these holders in terms of their securing the card.
Well, I'll bring this up on screen here, and I don't know. I don't think you can see my screen, but
I won't be able to. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna question about an item. I gotta figure it out. Oh, that's the green Mahomes. Here we go. It was a Topps Chrome Sapphire Orange Jamal Musiala card. And I want to bring up this image so for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So if you look, let me see if I can click on it. If you look here, and I'll send you this link, Bunk, so you can see what I'm talking about. If you look right here, you can literally see that there is discolorations, and then there's another spot down in this lower left hand corner. And to me, there's no way that this surface should be anywhere near a 9 or a 10, and there's no way that the overall grade for this card with this kind of condition damage, especially for the value, should be a 10. And we've noticed it a lot. There's corner damage, surface damage. So I would highly recommend. And this card sold for $2,400, and I don't think it's definitely not a 10.
It's not going to PSA 10.
No, it would not. But I would highly recommend that if you are doing the whole look at SGC and wanting to flip it into a PSA 10 for the purposes of flipping or anything, that you take a strong look at the card before you just assume that it's going to 10 because SGC gave it a 10.
Yeah, I mean, the main takeaway is exactly what you said. Regardless of why it's happening or where the breakdown is, you got to self-review it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll try to post some stuff on Instagram and, put up pictures of the 5 other links that I saved of I must have looked at 20 or 30 cards, and 5 plus were cards that I could see naked eye with defects that there's no way that they should have been 10s.
Well, I shouldn't be able to see a white corner and say, hey, that corner's white, and it have a 10 on it.
Well, I put the link in the chat for what I was talking about. If you look at the back,
I see that. I mean, he physically said it's from coming off the card. It's not just like debris in the case or something.
I mean, look at it. There's
I see it.
There's literally ink missing from the back of the card.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Like if you look at the back in the upper right hand corner, you can literally see that the ink is missing. Like it looks like it has been rubbed off or it's stuck or something. And the seller blamed the case. I mean, if the seller owned the card originally and sent it to SGC and knew what it looked like at when he first got it versus how it looks now, I mean, obviously the damage came from somewhere.
Right. But the quality of the card sucked.
Well, I mean, it's Topps Chrome. I mean, Topps Chrome has pretty high gem rates.
Yeah.
But anyway, that is our hot take for the week. You have anything else you want to cover before we roll into the interview?
Oh yeah, that's right. Short and sweet.
Short and sweet this week.
All right. No, I think we're good. I've got nothing bad to say. HGA is moving along my cards, so I'm pretty excited about
Yeah,
that.
we're in day 850 of those trying to come
Well,
back.
it was 50 days of not moving, and now it's actually things are starting to move.
Yeah,
We're
what?
well past 60 days though.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's what I said. We're in day 850 of those cards coming back. I mean, I'll put it to you this way: we bought stuff at National, and it's November, and it's still fucking sitting at HGA.
And it's only been scanned, so you're looking at another 4 to 6 weeks easy.
Yeah, it's the turnaround times are crazy. So
Well, now we send the PSA, so we're good.
yeah, well, and the lower end stuff send to SGC since they seem to slap tents on everything as well. So
The new PSA.
anyways, on that note, without further ado, we will move into the interview for this week. Ryan from Gemrate.com on the pod. That is all for us, and we will see you
Keep
guys.
pluralizing Gemrate, gems rates, or whatever you're saying. It's just Gemrate.
Yeah, Gemrate.com. Excuse me, spelling police.
Stats and spelling.
Stats and spelling. All right, and on that note, let's get the interview started.
Okay.
Alrighty, everybody. We got a special guest for this week's podcast. We are joined by Ryan, who is the founder of Gemrates. Definitely something I am looking forward to because I am a huge chart nerd and a huge data nerd when it comes to cards. So definitely looking forward to chatting with Ryan here. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great. Thank you guys for having me. Much appreciated.
Absolutely, we are definitely happy to have you on the pod. Have you done many podcasts so far?
No, this is actually just the second one. I did one with Brad and Dustin over the summer, but I've been pretty heads down since. So I'm excited to get back out there, tell a little bit more of the story of what we've been working on.
Absolutely. So before we get into actual gem rates, with every interview that we do, we kind of do go a little Marvel style and want to hear your hobby origin story. So give us the story on how you got into cards, and some of the things that you're loving about the hobby.
Yeah, I was a big data nerd early, and so cards and fantasy football kind of went hand in hand. I got into both in the late '80s, early '90s. So actually might have even done more fantasy football to start. I was sort of early in that where I was faxing in lineups with my dad back in 1990. I can remember that pretty vividly. But cards kind of went hand in hand with that. I was very big on baseball early on. And then 91, I think, was when it really kicked off. I was big on the Larry Johnson train. So I was doing everything I could to grab some of those upper decks. Kind of gravitated towards basketball for a few years. But I was a horrible collector. I was all about the thrill and the ripping. And so that was early, and it never really left me. So, I was all about what could I trade to, get cash to go buy the next pack of cards and, sort of have that outsized return or reward for what I was doing there. So my collection slowly dwindled from not much to nothing. And I revisited it probably 3 years ago. My dad had found it, and I was excited to look at it, and there was pretty much nothing but junk in there. Not surprisingly, but much worse than most of the stories where, it's a lot of late 80s and 90s junk. I just had nothing. I had not many cards even, to sort of showcase. So anyways, I was big in it, and then I kind of fell away from it like a lot of people did early in high school.
And then how'd you wind up getting back into it? As far as, where did gem rates, how did that come about? Obviously you had to have gotten back into the hobby in a major way, other than just finding some junk 90s basketball cards. So, where did Gemrate's origin story come from?
Yeah, I was clearly disappointed when I saw my collection and realized just how bad I was at sort of doing this back in the 90s. So I didn't really get back into it until the summer of last year when a lot of people did. I had done a lot of daily fantasy sports. I've been doing that for, the last 30 years now. But cards had been off my radar. Then I started to just see more articles come out about it. And I remember it was July 19th, I saw the article about the LeBron sale, and I was like, I have to understand what's happening here. There's just clearly so much momentum. I can't be sitting on the sidelines here and not paying attention to something that I used to care about so much, and I want to care about. I just needed a reason to exist to sort of come into the light to sort of show me, why it's worth paying attention to again. And so I just started listening to everything I could, every podcast, every YouTube video, and I just sort of went head deep into it. And I sort of emerged, months later with a lot of money spent. And, I very quickly learned what everybody says, which is so easy to buy and, really hard to sell. And so I was quickly in that boat of like, wow, I just spent so much money, amassing what is a hodgepodge of a collection, a lot of that through breaks, some of that through, outright purchases. And I was trying to sort of come to and be like, what am I actually trying to accomplish here? And so I took some time to sort of think about like, what do I want to actually do in this hobby? And sort of like, what do I want my collection to stand for? And so I started to take a step back, and then, I started just looking into the tooling. I was like, oh, wow, there were some emerging players in the collection management space, market movers, card ladder, those guys had both sort of started to make a name for themselves. You could look at some of the older tools in the space that have been around, like 130 and stuff like that were still getting a lot of traffic and eyeballs, but, clearly hadn't been supported heavily over the years. And so I just sort of saw that as an opportunity, not only to build a collection, but then thinking about tooling. And that's when Gemrate started to surface. I was very big on understanding sort of just what was underappreciated or undervalued in the hobby. And so, I immediately gravitated towards pop reports to just navigate. And for me, it was also great for context. I was out of the hobby for so long. I needed to understand what did people care about when I wasn't paying attention. And pop reports were a great way for me to do that. Quickly learn, over the years, what did people pay attention to? What were people, going out of their way to grade? What were the chase cards? Who were the players that sort of had momentum back in the day? Some of it was obvious, but a lot of it wasn't, especially as it relates to just like how the hobby and landscape had changed over the years.
Yeah, it's been something I've been trying to convince Bunk since we started this podcast, as far as the data aspect and the tool aspect will eventually catch up with other markets, financial markets and things. Bunk is a collector. I am more in this for the money. So, we have differing views on data sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great, points of tension in the hobby is sort of the investor collector, side of things. And I think there's obviously room for both. And I think I think Luber did a good job of sort of articulating some of that in his piece last week, just sort of saying, you need both those things to be thriving for this hobby to go where people want it to go. And I think, people are protective in this space, and it's also a hobby that's not short on opinions. And so, you hear a lot of loud voices all the time, and, not a surprise, right? I mean, everything is subjective in this hobby. So you have a lot of people chatting up.
Let me just cut you off here. Sorry for 1 second. For those of you that aren't sure what he's referring to, Josh Luber, the future head of Fanatics Trading Cards, released his Trading Cards Manifesto. I believe it's tradingcardsarecoolagain.com, I believe is the URL. And, and you got a shout out in that too, as far as one of the tools that he uses and thinks is good for the hobby. So those of you that haven't seen it, haven't read it, it's 60 pages of stuff about the hobby. So just so everybody's aware of it.
Yeah, it's a commitment, but it's a great read for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was a little long-winded myself, but I think he made some interesting points in it, and there's definitely some great data in there. And it's actually funny that he made a reference to crypto versus sports cards. I made a video on YouTube of comparing Ethereum to the 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan probably 6 months ago. And put it on YouTube, and 4 people saw it, so fantastic for us. But it's been pretty evident the comparison between the crypto market and sports cards.
Yep, absolutely.
So before we talk a little bit more about Gemrate, let's talk about your PC. Obviously you got back into it. You started, and you paid the expensive lesson, as everybody does when they get back into it. I was guilty of the same thing. Wasted a shit ton of money on eBay buying stuff that is now worthless. So who are you PCing? What kinds of things are you chasing for your own collection?
Yeah, I was originally big on the Zion train, just because that seemed it seemed so liquid and there was just so much momentum towards it. But I sort of quickly just fell off of that in the sense of, I'm not a huge believer in sort of long-term prospects. And also that was me caught up in the momentum. But I did have some cool cards that I had, either picked up through purchases or through breaks. At one point I had a Zion Tiger Prism from last year,
Nice.
which was cool. But somebody offered me like cash the minute I hit it in the break, and so I was quick to liquidate that. But
sold.
Now that I'm more focused on, I actually shifted a lot away from basketball. Basketball, I do it and sort of pick my spots. I'm actually with basketball, I'm much more focused on sets than I am on players. I feel like players are so volatile, but I feel like sets, if you pick the right spots, will sort of stand the test of time. And there's probably, because of all the noise in the hobby these days and just all the different sets and all the different parallels, it's pretty hard to navigate. And so that's where I sort of want to wedge myself in there and find information disadvantages or things that were overlooked. And so I put a lot of time and effort towards, and Gemrate, that's one of the reasons it came to fruition, was I was just trying to understand again, like what was released when, what had momentum, but didn't necessarily get graded or fell off the radar. Nobody talks about these days. So anyways, for example, obviously along with many people, I learned quickly of Kaboom. It started to get hyped, and but it was so expensive, and it was sort of just like so much hype around it. So I kind of, quickly just was like trying to take that in. But as I started looking at the data, I started looking at 2013, 2014, learning the stories. So I'm actually collecting the 2014 Kaboom set, and I'm trying to get it all graded and all gems. There's very few of them gemmed today across both BGS and PSA. Actually, more of them are graded with BGS because it was 2014 set, back when BGS was the go-to. And yeah, that was like a good example of it's a story that's not well known. It's one of the two versions of Kaboom that were actually illustrated. It's a little bit polarizing in that sense because the representations don't look like every player in the way that you might want them to be, but it's also very unique and rare versus like the more comic Kabooms you see today, which you can't even tell if it's a 2018 or a 2020 or whatever. And it wasn't even a case hit. It was one every other cases, and it was a target only skew. So anyways, stuff like that gets my attention. I like a lot of the Court King stuff because I feel like that's interesting in the way it looks. I try to find the right combination of things that are scarce, but also, desirable and have a good look and feel to them. So, just being rare or sort of low pop doesn't really necessarily, it'll get my interest, but then I try to understand, is that because people didn't care about it, or is that because, it's hard to find and, there is actually demand for them. And
you lost Jeff at sets. he tuned out when you said he couldn't build a 5-card set.
Yeah, no, I have no patience for set. I mean, so all right, let me clarify that. 2014 Kaboom set is much different than like the 1994 fucking Topps whatever set that has 700 cards in it and 692 of them you don't care about. Like, I mean, the set that
building that.
Yeah, exactly. The set that you collect is like that kind of crap that has a whole bunch of 96% of it is garbage. Meanwhile, 2014 Kaboom, there's probably how many cards are in that set?
50.
Wow. Okay.
Which is a lot for a Kaboom set.
Yeah.
But to Ryan's point, look at over the last year with the pandemic and the boom and everyone being home, look at all the 90s insert sets that became popular. And then all of a sudden, when they were graded, they were selling for $1 bajillion that people had forgot about for 20, 25 years. I mean, that's exactly how you kind of found that 2014 Kaboom. People were finding these old inserts. And prior to a year ago, the biggest baseball insert set from the, that people loved are those 1993, 1994 finest refractors. If you could get your hand on one of those PSA 10, it was thousands of dollars. I've been searching for those. I'm going through boxes every day. I swear I got some somewhere.
Yeah. I think the 90s is still so interesting as it relates. I don't enter that area of the hobby too frequently because I still feel uninformed relative to others in the space. But I do love sort of some of the hints you're catching around. Like, look, what's happening with basketball could very much happen with football or baseball. And so, some of these things you're seeing, these sets that are taking off these inserts, parallels that are taking off with basketball. You could very much see some of that with football, with baseball. So I'm starting to sort of like think about what that could look like. But yeah, I love things that sort of, should follow if sort of there's the historical trends hold, and starting to think about like what that could look like, or trying to reverse engineer like what made PMGs, popular, and they or the chase cards, and that's the obvious one, or sort of like so played out, but like let's think about what's next after that and what could look like that today.
And which one of the 2014 Kabooms that you have in possession is your favorite card?
It's a love hate. It's my Steph Curry, which I bought at the National, but I'm a Clevelander, and so I'm a Cavs fan. I'm a diehard Cleveland sports fan, so I hate Steph. I respect him, but I can't. He's a thorn, and he's so good. I can't help but appreciate him, but at the same time, he's just so good, and it's so frustrating. So anyways, I have a Steph that I'm pretty happy about. There's a LeBron and a Kobe in that. They're both pretty pricey, and I'd like to get them in gem too. So I'm just really holding out, which is kind of problematic. I have the debate of should I get all the low end stuff, or should I just go in? If my theory is right and this is going to appreciate over time, I really should be buying the high end stuff first and then get the low end stuff later because those will lag. But I'm doing it wrong just because of cash flow and sort of just trying to make sure that
And are you looking for stuff that's already gemmed, or are you looking for stuff that you can eye up and say, okay, this has a shot that it may gem, so let me try to buy it raw and then grade it?
I'm buying a lot raw because there's just not a lot graded across the BGS and PSA. I think there's only a few hundred, 400 maybe that have been graded, and I think only, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's less than 100 that have gemmed across all of them, and it's a 50-player set, right? So it's hard to find them anyways. So I'm just trying to get really good at understanding condition, and it's exactly like what I use Gemrate for, though, which is I can't get it gemmed with PSA. 2 of the last 100 cards from that set sent to PSA have gemmed, so it's pretty much impossible. Yeah. So, I just sent out a batch of them actually to SGC, which I'm totally okay with them being, 10s or even 9.5 right now. And I feel pretty good about being able to analyze them. But yeah, I'm buying a lot of them raw, and I'm just trying to be opportunistic. I think they're great cards to hold anyways. I'd like for what I hold to be the gems, but at the same time, I'm also just trying to collect any that I find that I feel like are undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've learned the hard way. You should absolutely go after the higher end pieces of a set that you're committed to. Absolutely, grab them first. I have so many incomplete sets because of that reason.
Yeah, I know I'm doing it wrong too, and every time I see it there, fortunately nothing has come up where I've been really kicking myself, or the Kobe or the LeBron has been on eBay, or I've seen it at a show. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out what that looks like.
Those got to be stupid expensive. 2014 Kobe Kaboom PSA 10 has to be crazy expensive.
Yeah, I can't remember if there was even a PSA 10, but the BGS 9.5 they're like 10K. LeBron would probably be 15, and Kobe's 10 to 12 if they were PSA 10s, if not more.
Yeah. So that segues us into perfectly, as far as you said, using Gemrate. So for those of the audience that has no idea what Gemrate is, I mean, we have mentioned it multiple times on this podcast, but for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, can you give everybody a breakdown of what Gemrate is, as far as the basic overview of the site, and then a few recommended ways to use it for those that are trying to make the most of it?
Yeah, so it's basically, in its simplest form, it's the pop reports on steroids. So a lot of these sites, just hadn't been, iterated on much or sort of improved upon over the years, and so BGS is pretty frustrating to use. PSA at least revamped their website at the beginning of the year, so it was much more manageable. But at the end of the day, they're not, they're doing sort of just enough on that front, and so they're not necessarily making it easy to do what you want to do there. So anyways, I saw it as an opportunity, just look, I'm using these things every day, and it's so painful copying them to Excel and trying to make sense of it, and trying to look at parallels or look at different players and aggregate the data. So anyways, I was just so frustrated. So I'm like, what would it take for me to sort of pull this data in myself on a daily basis to make sense of it? So I just spent 2 months at the beginning of the year doing everything I could to see if it was even viable to pull the data in reliably. And so that was a lot of the legwork. I focused on PSA just because that's where so much momentum in the hobby was. That's just where everybody has been grading cards, and there was all the talk around just rising costs and all this stuff. So anyways, but the goal of it is, again, just a user-friendly pop report that allows you a lot more flexibility to analyze things in a way that you might want to. So, for example, one of my favorite use cases is a player view, and so it's just, for example, more recently, if you think about Miles Bridges just popped off, what does that look like for him? What is his sort of graded, cumulative, set look like? And so that's one of the things that you can really easily find on Gemrate, which is, the number of cards that he has that have been graded, what's the gem rate look like? What does that look like across different sets? I then like to dig into sort of, again, what are harder to gem cards, because that's usually where you find some pricing dislocation, where either the gems are underpriced or PSA 9s are underpriced because people don't realize that there's just not many gems or cards that are capable of gemming. And so trying to find inefficiencies in that. So I use the player view quite a bit. It's great for context too. So, for example, if you're looking at the beginning of the NBA season, you want to understand what Miles Bridges looks like versus Desmond Bane versus Darius Garland, 3 players that people care about. Very different ways that you would approach those markets. Desmond Bane has less than 100 cards graded, yet across all of sets from 2020 because grading was so expensive. Whereas Miles Bridges, there's certain cards that you might want to avoid. His base, for example, doesn't have many graded, but if you look at Luka, you can see it's going to go from the 600 that are graded, that it could potentially go to the 30,000 that are graded, which is what Luka has. Versus Silver Prism actually is about like halfway to the potential that you might see, because there's like, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's like 20. I actually have the number.
I have it up. So if there's something specific you're looking for, I actually brought it up so that people that are watching on YouTube can see it.
Nice. Yeah. So, like a Silver Prism, there's more Silver Prisms for Miles Bridges graded than there are his base, which just shows, again, it was sort of like a fringe enough card that people were willing to get it graded where the base wasn't really on their radar. And now that, it's only getting processed through the value subs these days, where the Silvers, most of them have already popped, essentially, or people are going to resurface them and consider grading them. Anyways, point being is it just really gives you a lot of context in a starting point. So, I like to think of Gemrate as being really useful for discovery and sort of context, whereas I think what market movers with card ladder do really well are they're great at trending and really helping you from a bottoms up. If you have a card in mind, or you have a place that you want to start a card, a player, and some very specific things that you want to understand quickly, amazing tools for that. And I think Gemrate's very complementary to that, which is, what's the macro view like? What are sets doing from certain years, certain categories? What does it look like through the player lens? I love taking it to the parallel view. So I created this view that's just aggregating all the different parallels, so you can understand, are there certain parallels that print in a way that aren't favorable for grading and therefore are undervalued? So, for example, the Hyper Prism is a pretty noteworthy one recently. The Shock from from Optic is, historically a tough grade. You have Lucky Envelopes with Select. You have Prism with Topps Chrome. Every set has sort of these wild cards which just don't grade well, and therefore, as long as, again, they have to be still desirable. They just can't be poor grades and are hard gems and therefore have value. But if they're desirable and they grade tougher, there's an opportunity there for price appreciation. So, I love using Gemrate for things like that.
See, we actually, not to cut you off again, we actually use it the opposite. When we're looking for stuff to grade, we look for the stuff that has high gem rates because it has a higher probability of a 10, so that if we're going to buy at 500 and a PSA 10 is worth, 2,500, I'd rather be buying something that has an 80% gem rate versus a 25% gem rate, because I have a higher chance of getting that 10 that I'm looking for, so that I can dump the card and make my money and move on. So we use it opposite.
Well, and listen, shows are getting more popular, so more people looking at cards in person, but where do the majority of people buy their cards? Online somewhere.
Yeah.
So if I don't have great pictures, or it looks pretty good in a picture, but let me see. All right, well, it's gemming at a 68% and it looks pretty good. I'm more apt to go after that card because of that information now.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That was exactly what I was going to go into, which is, I think one of the basic use cases for Gemrate is just I'm soon to release other population reports on Gemrate too, which will help you understand and think about the broader landscape. Gemrate is focused on PSA to start just because of the market momentum, but I want people to understand what would you expect, or where should you think about grading given the expected return if you knew probabilities around Gemrate? If you knew that PSA was really tough, but BGS, you have a good chance of getting that gem because they're a little bit more lenient somewhere. They just have a lot more 9.5s in the pop report. Therefore, it's worth it to send it to BGS because your probability is higher, even if the return's less. Anyways, it helps you think about where to grade with which company, and that'll be even more obvious. Right now, you have to jump between pop reports still, but when that's all integrated within Gemrate, I hope to make that even clearer. This is your best chance to maximize return on your grading dollars is to use Gemrate to navigate that.
And the plan is to bring in BGS and SGC pop reports, I would assume.
Yep.
And no HGA.
Absolutely. Hey, I'll bring them in. I've used HGA. I'm not a hater. I grade cards a lot because I like to test my ability to, decipher what's a good quality card. And so I test all the surfaces out. So, I don't throw any shade at all of them. They all.
Oh, no. It's just an ongoing joke with Bunk and I on this podcast as far as his affinity for HGA and their strictness on grading. He likes a grading company that is more strict and doesn't give out as many 10s. He is somewhat anti-PSA because he figures they throw out 10s like candy. So
it's real simple. My argument's real simple. Until PSA has a 9.5, the market's all screwed up, and that's a fact. That's just fact.
They are the only
pure fact.
They are the only ones who don't have it at this point. Every other major grading company does.
You can't argue me on it. It's pure fact. So I just think more, okay, that's a 10, that's a 9. Like, give me the 9.5. I feel better about the car. Now, listen, I'm not dumb. If I'm going to grade something to make money, where's it going?
PSA.
PSA. I mean, that's just. Now, I got a question for you, Ryan. When you pull in all these other companies, one of the things I've talked about a lot too that drives me nuts is, and you may tell me it's a negligible number, don't even worry about it. What about all the people that are cracking slabs open at a ridiculous rate and making videos? And now there's so many certain cards, you're talking not dozens, probably hundreds of cards that from one company are now on another company's pop report. Does that factor in at all?
No, it's a great question. I mean, it's definitely, I've done it, and it's something where, it's not illegal. It's commonplace in the hobby, right? I mean, people are savvy these days. And so it's hard to know. I mean, it's one of those things where I'd have to do some sort of, qual-quant survey work almost to sort of gauge what that looks like, and then factor in those, back to the envelope estimates into Gemrate to sort of say like, hey, this is what I think this actually might look like from a, actual supply standpoint as opposed to what the pop says, because the pop's not exactly one-to-one with supply. So yes, I think it's interesting. I don't have a great way to, distinguish that today or decipher that from what exists, but it for sure happens, right? Obviously, and it's a factor. So there's some discount that needs to be applied, and maybe it's just, maybe it just sort of like scales with the premium to the card, and you sort of like put some weights to it, some discount to sort of the population. But it's pretty tough because of just the movement between the different grading companies over the years.
There's so many products, so many people, so much volume that ever get an accurate handle on that, I think is going to be damn near impossible.
Yeah. I don't know, but I think it definitely is something that I think about in the sense of I want to make sure I want to acknowledge it, even if I can't account for it. I want to make sure it's something that's acknowledged.
Yeah, I mean, and I would have to think that the pop reports that are going to be the most screwed up would be the SGC and BGS pop reports, because unless you're cracking your PSA to resubmit it for a better PSA grade, you're usually not cracking out of PSA and going anywhere else.
And that's a separate issue. The PSA 9 reports I find fascinating because I know a lot of people that crack their 9s and resub 9s right back to PSA because they've gotten 10s the second time. So I find PSA 9 numbers very interesting sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest things and sort of the struggles I still have with the hobby that I'm still trying to just, calibrate is, and I don't outwardly sort of speak to this with the Gemrate monthly report that I put out, but I mean, like, the fluctuation in Gemrate is important, and, expectations are a tricky thing to navigate in this hobby, which, in the report I put out at the beginning of the month, it just showcases sort of like, I'm showcasing the 2019 Prism, which, you're kind of expecting the same type of cards that were graded in October were similar in profile to the cards that might have been graded in like July or June. Those cards were all sent in prior to, the grading freeze back in March, at the end of March. And so anyways, the grading scale, the Gemrate for that set was like 45% over the early summer, and it's now 60%, right? And like, not a lot has changed from the card, most likely, and at least from what I'm learning from Gemrate, that, that looks pretty similar. However, that's a big gap. That's more than 1 out of every 10 that are getting a PSA 10 that weren't earlier in the summer. And part of that's just because I think, my hypothesis just PSA was bringing in a lot of new graders, and I think they were rounding down when they started. I think that was sort of, as the insurance policy that PSA has, and sort of, it's a lot more, there's a lot more accountability in the market. They're buying back cards, they're going into the market sort of where there's grading errors that have been made and that are obvious. They're participating a lot more, and they're a lot more accountable in that sense. So I think if you're new, you're going to sort of err on the side of caution. And I think you saw that in the grading numbers, and now I think you're seeing a little bit of a release in that, and the grading numbers are improving. But that's pretty problematic. If your cards were graded in June and July versus your cards now got pushed out into, the September, October time frame. And so anyways, it's like, it sucks, candidly. It's like, what do you do about it if you're a collector? And you can't do much, right? You're subject to the machine there.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting theory, because I mean there was that rumor going around that PSA was cracking down on giving out so many 10s, but I mean that would definitely explain, if you're a new grader, just got hired at PSA, you're not like throwing out 10s willy nilly. You're definitely going to make sure you're going to look twice, 3 times before you assign a grade. So it makes sense.
There was a legit 2 to 3 month period on hobby Twitter where everyone was posting 9s and going bonkers, like bonkers. To Ryan's point,
yeah,
I remember that vividly now. That as he's saying it, I'm like, oh my god, people going nuts for a couple months.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the headlines now too, I look at YouTube every day, and it's just the jubilation of like the Gemrates. People are so excited, and it's like, yes, they're definitely better, and like I don't know if that's because anything changed other than sort of the way that people were grading cards at the time. So it's a difficult dynamic to sort of wrap my head around, because it's like, I don't know what that means over the long run, other than I think consistency matters. And so I think that's going to be really important for PSA over the long run. And, all these companies in the space.
And PSA is continuing to expand. They have a new office opening in the States. They have an office opening in Canada. So there's definitely expansion going on within that company.
And how much of it, some of it is, the backlog, those cards finally coming back. And I think some of it too, as last year went on, people were getting more into what they were sending. I think people did a better job what they were sending in, as opposed to just, especially if they were submitting at the, the 250 or the 200 price point, whatever it was. I think people were doing a better job sending not the crap in, as opposed to just sending everything in because it was $8. So, I mean, there's probably a big differentiation between the grades there too.
Yeah, and it's outside of Gemrate purview, but I'd like to get your take on that. We had a debate on this question. Do you feel that getting, because obviously Card Talk did that interview with Nat Turner, and he's like, we want to get back to where we were on the price points. Do you think a $10 price point is good for the hobby?
Oh,
I think they did an excellent job of windowing sort of where they're going with it, which not a surprise to me, because Nat's been very adamant in all of his interviews about set collectors, and so they're going to do something there. And so, I think it's really smart how they were thinking about it. It wasn't on my radar around, tying your set registry to discounted pricing, and like having that be sort of validation of, your discount essentially, and getting you clearance to get certain cards graded if you need them to complete your set. So I definitely think they'll do that. I think they also mentioned a queuing system, which is not a surprise. I think that was one that I sort of, I think HGA showcased it well, and I think there's a lot of potential for that in the sense of, you just need to limit people. They cannot open floodgates. I mean, the example I used in July I was talking to Brad and Dustin is, there was 400,000 Prism cards that have been graded from 2019 as of July. Now it's closer to 500,000. There's only, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's a few thousand. It's like 5,000 to 10,000 that have been graded for 2020. Half of those from last year are base, so like 250,000 are base. Let's assume that those people are smarter and savvier this year, and they don't grade base to the same degree by any means. But you still have a lot of parallels out there that people are sitting on, hoping to grade, that maybe, again, you can cut that number by a decent chunk, but you're still looking at hundreds of thousands of cards that people are just sitting on. So anyways, I think it's underestimated throughout the hobby, just like what it would look like if PSA to open their doors. So I think they're going to be pretty thoughtful about it. I think I'm very curious, like October, they kind of like pulled back on their grading activity. And I'd like to think that's because they were either I'm probably decompressing from a really big push in September for their quarter end and sort of just having a strong close. But then also, I think they're up to something in the sense of, trying to set themselves up for opening up a different price tier or something along those lines, but also technically setting themselves up for that challenge. I don't know what that looks like, but I think they're going to open. So I think they'll open up a lower price tier, but very set oriented and through the registry, which Nat spoke to, or at least was hinting at. I can't remember exactly the specifics. And then I don't think they're going to get to a sort of an open, anybody can jump in, low price point for a long time.
Yeah. There's been rumors that the $100 price point is going to hit before the end of the year, which wouldn't really surprise me. I mean, their turnaround time on the new stuff at $150 has been solid. So I definitely think that's a possibility. And, you know, I wouldn't be upset, I guess, if they had some sort of weekly queue to take lower end stuff. So if you had a $25 price point or whatever it's going to be to do that, but only going to take a certain amount so you can actually turn it around in a decent time frame. Because I do agree that if all of a sudden they opened up a $10, $20 price point, there'd be, I don't think it'd be hundreds of thousands. I think it'd millions. I
They
mean,
would shut
literally,
down again.
yeah.
Totally.
And they'd bury themselves again. And I think that Nat is smart enough to know that that's not gonna happen because he knows what the hobby is like, and he knows that they get buried again.
Well, maybe BGS is going to swoop in here and come down.
Guy, BGS has to do something to regain their reputation in the hobby. I mean,
yeah, like swoop in before PSA.
And have you noticed that trend as far as value is concerned, that BGS 9.5s aren't worth what they used to be?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a struggle to sort of, you can't send anything to them because of the pricing, right? I mean, their pricing and then the market value of them is just.
It's got to be 4 figures.
Yeah.
Right.
It's definitely cost prohibitive. With that being said, let's push forward back into Gemrates. What do you, other than the combined, pop reports that you're looking at, what's the future of Gemrates look like?
Yeah, I'd like to integrate some pricing at some point. Again, if this is a discovery tool, having to jump out and go somewhere to understand pricing is problematic. It's just a lot of friction. So I'm not trying to be competitive with the collection tools in the space, but I do want to provide some context as relates to pricing. I'm not also trying to convince myself that everybody in the hobby needs a destination site to go to do this type of research. So I'd like to integrate it into the collecting experience. So, I have a world where, a Google Sheets plugin could exist, or Chrome extensions could exist, where this is integrated into where you're collecting as opposed to having to go to a destination site. I also want to distribute it where people are, sharing information and talking about their collection. So, I'm intentionally using Instagram as a platform because I think that's where a lot of the hobby is. So I'm trying to think about what that looks like.
Well, there's two generations of the hobby. There's the old fogies in the hobby, namely that one over there who doesn't understand Instagram and is on Twitter, and then there's the newer generation that's on Instagram.
Yeah, the hobby's intimidating. There's a lot of pockets. I'm still trying to get momentum on Twitter with Gemrate and trying to get a feel for that. And then you have, the Flickr crowds and the Facebook groups and the Instagrams. But so anyways, that's very much on our radar. And then in general, I'm really focused on good quality data. So advancing the way that you can look at the data, make sense of the data, and Gemrate's really important. I'm trying to, trust is the most important thing that I'm trying to build in this hobby. It's hard to gain and easy to lose it. So very focused on just making sure that we deliver consistently on what we're promising. And, candidly, it's pretty tricky. Everything that I'm subject at the mercy of these, pop reports. And, if you remove a period from Ken Griffey Jr., the whole thing blows up. And so anyways, I have to sort of anticipate and sort of plan for those things. And I've done a lot of that over the last 10 months. But anyways, there's a lot of nuance to it. So a lot of behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, it's early. And I'm excited about that, which, and then there's other ways that I think I think the pricing tools do a great job. Again, I've mentioned them a bunch of times. I'd like for Gemrate to also be a little bit of a predictor of price through the lens of supply or through the lens of other sort of metrics around like collectability and stuff like that. So anyways, it's not only around the population reports, there's proprietary data that I'd like to onboard at some point. But that's probably further out.
Okay. And then usually we cover, every week we cover some level of, flip, investment, collect type of thing that we feel is going to appreciate in value. So if you had to pick out a set, a player, or a card, or any or all of the above that you'd throw out there, I know I'm putting you on the spot for this, so don't feel that you have to, but do you have anything that you'd want to throw out there for stuff that you feel is undervalued right now?
I have a running list of sets that I'm looking at, but some of them have appreciated a lot since I sort of added them. For example, the 2017 Select Soccer Kabooms I really liked. This is the first one in that world.
We have a Christian Pulisic out of that set.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that set I saw some Ronaldos and Messis that sold pretty pricey over the past week. I actually really like the Impeccable set this year. I didn't pay much attention to it, but I really like the 2020 basketball Impeccable set. I really like the Impeccable stats. They're expensive, but I really like those. Those are very much on my radar. And then I was saying it earlier, but I really like Court King. I like graffiti stuff, and I like sort of the canvas that they use. And so anyways, I think that those are tough grades, so it kind of falls into that category of like there's some challenges there with getting the gems, and I also think they look good, which again is a big important part of my philosophy in sort of collecting. So Court King, I like a lot of the case hits there. In particular, I'm trying to collect the 2017 Aurora set, which is I like the LeBron cap stuff too, so I'm trying to collect a lot of that stuff.
Okay, awesome. Bunk, you got any other final questions here?
I got like some nerd old collector question for him if maybe he has the answer to.
Fire away.
So one of the things your site it'll show me some trends, right? Did you happen to notice, and you might not have, but when people started, everyone and their mother dug out their boxes and was sending stuff to get graded last year, right? So and certainly I find it fascinating some of the gem rates between chrome cards versus paper cards sometimes, right? And then certainly cards from the 80s and 90s, say some of in baseball, your Hall of Fame rookies like your Frank Thomases and your Ken Griffey Juniors. I almost wonder if the gem rates were a little better because again the cards were sent in when they were relatively newer. I mean, granted, PSA wasn't around, but you know what I mean. And then if everyone pulled out of their boxes, you got another 1,000 Griffies that have been sitting in box, not well handled and sent in anyway. How significantly did some of these early paper card gem rates just drop?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I don't know have a concrete answer to, but I mean they've been dropping a ton. I mean even like one example that we showcased pretty early on was the 90 Fleer Jordan, for example, was it's one of the highest graded cards of all time. But it's like nothing. People were worried about that cratering because so many were coming in to PSA and being processed, but actually like very few of them are gemming, very few. So actually it speaks to the value that might hold with the PSA 10 of the 90 Fleer Jordans. But everything else should be getting crushed because you're just getting a ton of 9s and 8s that are flooding the market. So I mean you're definitely seeing it. That's like a great example of where I easily have seen it, but I mean it's happening across the board, no doubt.
Yeah, like my 90 Fleer Jordan's been in a top loader since 1990, whereas the ones coming in over the last 12 months have been mishandled.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a disservice too to a lot of the non-ultra modern collectors, which I'm looking to I'm excited for us to expand on, which is right now we just give the gems, right? And we have all the data for all grades. It's just not showcased yet because I want to make sure the user experience was simple and digestible. And anyways, but there's ways that I've been thinking about allowing people to see the full range of grades. So anyways, we have all that. We have all that trended over time. So I think that's going to be really appealing to anybody that's not just paying attention to the 2016 ultra modern stuff, and on.
I'd be interested.
And can I ask a question, Bunk? You have a 1990 Michael Jordan card?
Yeah, I do. White bordered, right? 90 Fleer. I got it.
Fair enough. I didn't think you knew what basketball was back in 1990.
Well, I didn't know basketball, but I knew Michael Jordan.
Any other questions, Bunk?
No, I'm good.
I think that's it. Ryan, we really appreciate the time. It was awesome chatting with you, and keep us posted on the future of gem rates, and as you release new stuff, we'll definitely get you back on here to talk about it and get your take on it.
Cool. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing. There's a lot of content in the hobby, and sometimes it's hard to stand out, but I like how you guys are pretty straight shooters, and I like the way that you guys are talking about it, and have just grateful that you guys had me on. So thanks for giving me that shot.
Absolutely.
Thanks.